First of all, thank you all for coming, and I want to thank the CCBC for hosting this and for hosting the show, and for CCB's ongoing support for the crafts in this province. Every exhibition is a once-only installation, and every exhibition is a culmination not only of studio endeavors, but also of the artist's life experience. To clarify at how I arrived at these works, I will trace the path of my figurative work from the very beginning. We're talking the dawn of time pretty well. And this talk will reflect the three trajectories that are also in the exhibition. In the individualized, I'll be looking at the individualized feminine persona, the equestrians, a merging of animal and human, and the big skirt, the collaboration with Drew, and this is Drew Schaefer. These next images are of the magnificent Tang court ladies that are the ancestors of what I did and the idea around this exhibit. And if anybody's got questions, just ask. It's fine. Just carry on. So now, here we go. So here's those wonderful Tang court ladies. I'm sure everyone's usually seen a few of these kicking around in really fancy museums. So these are the Ming. Now, if there's a Chinese speaker who can help me, I think it's the Mingqi. So these were the women. These were the portraits of women who would have been the spirit guides to the person who was entombed. Usually they were, they did use glaze, of course, but in this case, these look like they were painted or they had a stain on them, which has just survived. The Tang Dynasty was known as the golden era of poetry, and it was also a very enlightened era. The plumper figures were favored due to the influence of a great beauty who lived in the 1700s, Yang Gai Fei, which is kind of nice that we know her name. I mean, how often do we not know the name of women who really matter, right? So often. Anyways, next. So just more of these wonderful figures. So here you can see some remnant. I think it's stain. I don't know if it's glaze. But the lady on the far right is what they call the Sansai glaze, or the Agan spinach. And those were made of lead glaze bearing iron or copper or white. And they just put them on sometimes in a disorganized way. And that way, that was put on quite nicely. And then the lady in the middle, she's very plain, so she probably was painted. And isn't she a nice shape? They all are. To me, they very much relate to ceramics, to pottery. I think of them as pot shapes. I think of them as being full of breath and meaningful space. I think I really was attracted to the forms. So the lady on the, let's see now, where am I? Slender figures, like the one on the left, were dancers. And the long sleeves, of course, were there to elaborate. And they were called geiji. So you got to wonder if the word geisha comes from these ladies, because we're maybe a bit before the Japanese had geisha. I don't know. So she would be a dancer, an entertainer. They would sing poetry. They were not necessarily courtesans. I think they had a choice, maybe. And one of my favorites is the lady in the middle. She's holding a little tiny dog. And doesn't she look self-satisfied? And then there's the Sansai, a very good example of the Sansai glaze on the end. So these guys, the left and right, are from the north of China, and they think they came from maybe the north of China. And in the late 1600s to 755, when wars in that region broke out and destroyed all the kilns, so decorated figures like this stopped after 755. What I thought was so interesting about these guys, other than the fact that they're really beautiful, is that they're treated more as an opportunity to decorate. And they've used full advantage of the notion of fabric and skirt and everything else. And they're less about the person inside the skirt or the dress. And then the lady in the center is, she's got what you call sprigging on her dress, which is little tiny decorative bits of ceramic. And I use sprigging too. Love it. It's also, the English use it all the time. Everybody uses it. It's sort of one of those things. Fashion was very important in the Tang era, and hairstyles were obviously very competitive. These figures are showing only remnants of paint or stains. So the Tang era was very cosmopolitan, benefiting from the vast amount of trade coming along the Silk Road and from the Mideast. And Chang'an, which was the capital of during the Tang era, it's now gone. It's under fields, or it disappeared as a city. It disappeared. Upper class women enjoyed greater freedoms. They had greater autonomy and influence in court. They were permitted to wear men's clothing to ride and to play polo. They were known to lead armies, and there was one woman emperor in 690. It was a short-lived era, 600 to 900 AD. After the Tang era ended, the repression of women recommenced, and foot binding was initiated in the Tang Dynasty from 690 to 1279, and it persisted right on into the 20th century, foot binding. The Tang Dynasty, as I said, is considered an era of great poetry. I have a little poem here which sort of relates to the ladies. When first my hair began to cover my forehead, I picked and played with flowers before the gate. You came along on a bamboo horse and circled the walkway, playing with green plums. We lived together here in Chang'an County, 2 children without the least suspicion. When I was 14, I became your wife, so shy that still my face remained unopened. It's a lovely poem, eh? Anyways, next one. So my favorite lady is the lady on the left. I loved her dignity and her reserve, her real sense of personhood, a lovely matron. I mean, how many times do you get to see matrons in art, And so my version there beside her is of pandemic patients, and she's in her bathrobe with her nice slippers on, and she's holding her remote, but she still has her dignity. And this piece was shown in Changchun, China, and is in their collection. And just some quick close shots of some of the pieces in the show. And I wanted to show that the bird drip on the far right is also influenced by the English technique of spooning slip onto pots, as well as in reference to the Sansai glaze. Here's a couple more remnants from the past. Actually, the lady on the left, I can't find her. I don't know where she is. I thought I dropped her off at a shop, but she's not there. As far as I know, she hasn't sold. So anyways, she's drifting around in the universe. So if anybody ever finds her, let me know. Yeah, she is a bit skeptical. And the one on the right was shown in Toronto at a national show, and it got Best in Show. Sounds like the dog show, doesn't it? Best in Show. So this is where I started the figure. So we are heading back in time, and this is 1976. And this is my first exhibition at the House of Ceramics, Hiro Urakami's gallery on Hamilton Street, right across from the old Vancouver School of Art. It was a perfect location to attract young artists, and Hiro supported a huge growing milieu of ceramics that was just burgeoning in Vancouver in the 1970s. And largely because of his gallery, because he showed every 2 weeks there was a new show. And he supported the students from the school, and then he'd go and he'd find a traditional person. So he really covered everybody. I was 24, and it was just 3 years after I started my own self-directed apprenticeship at Peg's Place Pottery in 1973. I made hundreds of these little brown figures and a series of beaver personas. You can see the clown beaver behind me. In 1977, I walked into the children's hospital with that clown in my arms, thinking I could just drop it off at the hospital for the kids, you know. Anyways, the nurses said no. Here's more of the little brown figures, and I have almost none left. They just sold right away, but I did keep one string. And the ones on the bottom are from a chess set I sold at the House of Ceramics to a Swiss diplomat. And those are the toffs, and those are pawns, and the opponents were the peons. So in '77, Mary Daniel and I shared an exhibition at Heroes House of Ceramics, and I decided to do a bit of portraiture. One on the right is my brother, and the three little ones are my grandmother's. A portrait of them, and it's very tiny. They're only about 5 or 6 inches tall, and they're actually sitting on a sofa that's in my house. I got the sofa. Jerry, also these showed up at the House of Ceramics, the fallen ballerina, and so let me see where I am. So the fallen ballerina and Bacchus. And the Bacchus turned up in one of Hero's notorious erotica shows that he used to have. I was very affected by funk. And funk was the impudence of it, you know. And it was at its height in the prairies and in California at the time. I like the idea of objects that can have a narrative with sass. So during the years I was at the Vancouver School of Art, which 1979 you can see there to 82, I did 6 years at Peg's Place. I did a bunch of installation work, and I could not face doing any figurative work at the school. It was too personal. It just meant too much to me. I didn't want it sort of going under random criticism. I wasn't secure enough about it. So anyways, I'm not sure Tam or Sally even knew I was doing this stuff, because this was across the street. You know, the old Vancouver School of Art was so small that we were sort of spread out into buildings. Were you sent out into other buildings too? Anyways, I decided to do this, and so this is fabric dipped in plaster, pre-cut and dyed, and then stretched. So it filled the entire room, and behind it are a whole bunch of white ones, which you can barely see. Anyways, and now I took another hiatus from the figurative. As soon as I graduated, Terry and I built a studio garage at our home, and I embarked on digging up clay in Chilliwack and preparing it and making these slipware pieces, which I couldn't sell. And so after 3 years of hard labor, it's hard labor making your own clay, 3 years of that and not selling hardly anything except for the chicken pot pies, which I couldn't make enough of. I thought it's time to stop. And also I was getting a little older, and I really wanted to start a family. So there I am with the kids. So during that time, I did very, very little figurative work. So this is 1985. This is the last piece I made before my daughter was born in '85. And the comment I wanted to make about this is it's a very tall, like they're about 30 odd inches tall, and they're made out of very thin slabs, shaped from the inside. They're quite light, you can easily pick them up. The thing I wanted to talk about was that these are white, and they're kind of easy to take. I mean, they are a bit large, but what I was thinking about was that the Romans and the Greeks luridly painted their marble sculptures. And we've forgotten that. The paint washed away. So what people saw in the 16th or 15th, 16th, 17th, what they saw was washed away marble. And they thought it became a taste culture, right? White marble. And the other thing about white marble is very elegant, and it isn't in your face. Like the colored figurine, the colored statues and gods would have been really in your face, right? And so would anything that's large, and painted. So anyways, I just thought, nah. And I painted them bright pink or flesh pink. And they're sort of stashed away. And they're, they're about this big, they're a good size. So I was embarked on the torso, and what I could do with sculpture while I had the kids was I could wrap it up and put it away for weeks, right, if I had to, which you can't do with pottery, or not with slipware pottery. So this torso, again, is quite a big one. I think Mary Daniel, you own that one. And then the little torso beside it is very tiny. It's only about this big. And so I do love messing around with scale. And then, of course, the idea came from, I found torsos to be very powerful, female power. I found, and of course, the idea is completely stolen from the famous, prehistoric Venuses. And so it's not an if, it's once you've got it and you can make these slab structures, the right and left are, again, very tall, 30 odd more inches. The main thing about them, you have to make them fresh so that they don't get stiff and lose their nice body form. But the thing is, you can do anything on the surface. They're just like a big canvas. And whatever you do completely alters what they are. And the one in the middle is finger slipped. So my fingers dragged through wet slip. And there's one piece in this show that I still, that shows that technique. And the girl with the tree, I think some sculpture society from Kenya bought that. That's kind of interesting. So while I had the kids were little, it was really nice to make these are tiny little pinch pots. And it was just very, very nice. It was very intimate and easy to do. So I was involved with making torsos for quite a long time. And finally I was publicly accused in a workshop, in a big public workshop, of objectifying women. And it was a man who accused me of that too. It was very interesting. And it was a male professor, I may add. And of course, during those years, the 1990s, there was a lot of that going on, with the men having to defend themselves and the women defending themselves, in university settings, and it's still going on, of course. So the criticism, I knew the criticism wasn't fair, but I wasn't articulate enough, or I couldn't understand the situation well enough to actually argue. And I had to think my way through it. And I'm not really a very quick thinker when it comes to sort of figuring all this kind of stuff out, especially woke stuff. It just takes me forever. And so I moved on to dresses. And again, of course, the dresses just offer terrific opportunities for playing around with the surface. And the other thing about a dress is it's less personal. It is like a shell. It is sort of a covering. It isn't the same as a figure, but it's still figurative. And these little guys came along, but suddenly I thought, oh, I can put little legs on the bottom, I can do this, So I made a whole show based on these little legs. Literally, I sort of, popped the legs on the bottom of the dresses. And then I put heads on them. So then I thought, okay, they're people now. So these are all little figures with heads and feet. And one of them is a bottle, the one on the right. So I dipped into this very briefly. I liked the idea of a slightly more mechanical figure. I didn't do many of these, but they're sort of doll-like. They're not really human-like. And the thing I discovered at that time was hair. And how I came across the hair was, I was going to the big galleries a lot, like MOA, Vancouver Art Gallery, and I was looking at the Indigenous collections. And I looked at the masks and I saw the horsehair that they used often, around the masks. And I thought, hair, I can do hair, So since then I've been working with either straw, actually the one in the middle is real Barbie hair. The other one is scrubbing cloths, but usually it's all different kinds of wire, fishing line, telephone wire, you name it. Figure variations, house dresses on a pot. I was involved with Linda Doherty. Remember, you guys did all that labor making the tiles, and Sharon had this going at the Lougheed Mall. My God, it was a fabulous project. It was in honor of Shadbolt and I think it's still there, isn't it? It's still survived. Anyways, there was 5 artists involved. And that's the only time I've really done any kind of tile work, and it was fun. That was fun, and thanks to Linda and Sharon who got that going. And the other one is now a dressed jug. And again, you can see I've finger slipped it and scratched it. So I'm still on the figures, and I'm returning to the baby. You know, I haven't shown you any of the babies I've done, because it's just another whole area. But I did do this babyish figure, and also discovered slip casting. So in 2010, if I can catch up with my notes, Mary Daniel and I headed off on a great adventure going to the International Ceramic Studio in Hungary. And we were there for 3 months. And I think you already knew how to slip cast. Yeah. You knew something about it, right? I knew how to press mold, but I don't think I'd ever made a slip cast. So anyways, we had sort of rudimentary training in slip casting. And what was really, we got to use this beautiful Harend porcelain, which is, I don't know, I don't know if it shows in this slide what a lovely, lovely surface it is. And these are, they're only about 5 inches big. And the thing about molds, of course, you know, I mean, is that you could make multiples. You can make thousands of these things. And it's a very effective way of doing exhibits. A lot of people have used that for exhibits. So this is just the same guy, just slightly altered. And again, this is where the surface comes into it, and you can really, really play around with the surface. And there we are. So now I have moved along I stretched out the baby form, but I still like this thing of the baby standing in that really unnatural pose for a child, you know, with their hands down by their side, they're standing at attention. And of course, these are slip casts and they're porcelain. This is the same pot, these are the same pieces. They're standing on little hump thrown pots. And, you know, you can alter things, right? You can mess around with their necks and their heads and do all sorts of kind of stuff. So this is just an example of how you can play with the multiples, and just a modest example of that. So then I moved on back to the baby form, but these are big, like these are big, tall, and they're porcelain, and they're press molded. And again, you take one idea or you take one shape, and then you can just run with it, right? It gives you such freedom. To build a figure like this each time from scratch would just take too long, you know. It would be discouraging. And I'm very fond of the tummy profile. They all have the big tummy. These became proto-humans. So they're a little less baby-like. They were made at the Museum of Anthropology I did a 1-year residency in the Judy Cramner lab at MOA. And I was studying initially went there to look at how they decorated the tinware pots that are in the Walter Kerner collection. And I thought I'd like to transfer that somehow onto figures in a meaningful way. But while I was there, I became caught up, you know, you get this, if you're there all the time and you keep going and you hear about Walter Kerner's story of him having to flee the Nazis, him and his brother and their families fled Central Europe. They were unable to save most of their families, but they themselves and their children survived. And he came to Canada, and he came with his collection. He was a great philanthropist. But what he collected a lot of was tinware, and what he really loved was the Anabaptists. And the Anabaptists were also a persecuted sect, and they had been persecuted throughout Europe for centuries. And they are the ancestors of your Mennonites, your Amish, your Hutterites, and your Doukhobors. All those people, they all had sort of similar belief systems, and they were all driven out of Europe, and they ended up in North America. I don't know if there's any left in Europe. There might be. Anyways, so I became aware of this migration and refugee, and of course terrible things were happening in Europe at the time. Millions of refugees were pouring out of Syria. You know, all those tragedies were unfolding. So the last piece I made there was this fragmented piece. And to me, the idea was that when you're forced to migrate, you become fragmented. There's always a part of you leave behind. I've heard people, even people who willingly have migrated or emigrated, have told me that they always feel divided between their original country and their new country. And the piece on the left really was fragmented. I actually managed, after 50 years of work, to blow up yet another piece. Anyways, I put it back together again, and I really liked it, and it now belongs to a very brave collector. So now this is the next trajectory in the show. I only had two ones present of the equestrians, but I was really interested and have always been interested in the idea of merging human and animal and plant. And this is an old piece of mine. It's actually a teapot, you know. So I started playing around with it, and the idea was that if you flip them over, they would actually look like one piece. They're not separate. They're not made separately. They're made as a unity. And again, you know, everything you put on the surface of the piece completely bends the narrative and changes the narrative of these. The one on the right is very tiny, and the other two are sort of average size. So what that did was I had started on that, and then I was approached. There's a really long backstory. I won't go into it, but I was approached by the Leach Pottery in the UK to come and do some research and response to these really eccentric equestrians made by Bernard Leach. Can you believe it? In 1926. Anyways, I was thrilled to bits because I had always loved horses. I used to draw horses ad nauseum. I was a horse in my head half the time. But I gave it up when I was a teen, and then when I was working in ceramics, I thought, oh, horse legs. You know, oh, you can't do horse legs. So I didn't. But this invitation came, and I was simply over the moon. So Bernard Leach only made two of these that we know of. So the other one is the guy on the left. Now, the one on the left, you can see, has been cemented onto a very rough looking, what it is a ridge tile. It's an earthenware ridge tile. You cap the roof with these, and most ridge tiles in Britain are made of earthenware, and these they used to put over the old smoke holes when they changed from that. Anyway, I could go on. I won't. So in the middle is a wonderful little metal medallion of a crusader, probably, or St. George, and the one on the left is Grayson Perry. There's Alan Measles, and he is St. George. Equestrian stuff equestrian images were ubiquitous. When you think of it, there was no cars. Horse and riders were it, right? Until the end of the car. So they would be everywhere. You see all the bronze statues in all the parks and everything. So just a tiny bit of equestrian clay history because it was so interesting. So the one on the left is a 15th century one. It is the oldest one in Britain that has survived. They did not survive. They were earthenware. They got actually, people used to shoot them, you know, little boys slingshot them. Now the one in the middle is 20th century. We're not exactly sure who made it, even after all the research we did, but we know that somebody in St. Ives made it. It's on a 17th century roof. Isn't that roof just so yummy? And anyways, and you can see that there's a detail. See how the slide, the ridge tile is sagging. So these would have been made in the local pottery. And then the one on the top right is the 18th century, more like a chevalier. And there's about 2 or 3 of those left. The French have some too. Theirs are in better shape because their climate is easier. So the one on the left, you can see is missing its head. The horse is missing its head. It's on the roof of a house right across from the Leach Pottery. And Hamada used to have his baths at this house. It used to be a hotel. Well, one of my students had bought that house, and she was taking a class from me. And we were working on finials. And so what she did was she owned this house, and she was re-roofing. So she removed that really nice tile, but that one's been slingshotted. It's really close to the road. And she gave it to the Leach Pottery. And she made this one herself, and she's a design teacher. And you can really see, look at that profile. It's just terrific. Anyways, I was thrilled to bits because it was a new rendition of a really old tradition that was 100 years since one has been made. So I was tickled pink. I wrote a book with the assistance of the potter historian Peter Smith. It took 3 years for us to try and figure out who was living in these houses, why these 20th century ones were made, and why did Leach make them? All those things. Anyways, I have my little book here if anybody wants to read it. Yep. Yeah.
Wondered
Equestrian
no,
videos. Yeah.
I think they really held the availability of
Well, that's a good question. They used to be, I mean, because they're very fragile, and a lot of these are on the coast, and they're on the coast because I think the idea came from France, and there was a lot of trade between Cornwall and France. So first off, I think the idea came from France, and of course it's the equestrian. So it's the Crusader, it's Saint George, it's the Chevalier, and all of France and England shared that. And they were made out of earthenware. So in England and near the salt water, you can see the one, and I can't go backwards, but you remember it looked like it was sandblasted. So householders, we think, Peter Smith and I figured that householders would approach the potters who were making the roof tiles. So, and they still are. I mean, those roof tiles are still being made in England. And they would approach them, and so the guys who made them, when you look at them, they're very primitive. They're not made by a sculptor. They're made by somebody who just was asked to make an equestrian, and they really vary in quality. And you can see there's lots of extra supports, like they have funny legs and all kinds of stuff going on. And I think, again, it's because the potter, and the clay was so poor, the potter had to put in all sorts of extra supports. And then people would damage them. And I think they were going up on the roof until the 18 or 1900s. They were going up on roofs. It's just that it just kind of faded away. And there's no real knowing. And then you see the reason you got the 1920s ones is that Leach belonged, oh, this is it. This is the rabbit hole. This is the rabbit hole. Leach belonged to a Cornwall society who are bringing back Cornwall traditions. And there was a group, and they were all these people whose these pieces were on the roofs belonged to this Cornwall group. Now, whether they made them themselves or not, we know Leach made his too, but they're very different from the ones, there's 3 others on roofs in St. Ives. I scoured the village, the town, and those are the only ones known. And so they were put up in the 1920s, and that was to try and pull back that tradition, a little bit of a revival. And of course, a lot of organizations were doing that. A lot of organizations like the Mingay and all that, trying to pull back from the Industrial Revolution and all that kind of carry on. So it's a good question. I can't really answer why it faded out for 100 years, but it goes on and on and on and on. So I was given an exhibition with all the other guys from North America who had recently had residencies there. So it was Warren McKenzie, Glenn Lewis, and Jeff Ostrich. I'm not showing their work, just mine. But anyways, it was great. It was a nice little group exhibition of North Americans. That's why it was called Visitors from Across the Pond. So the one on the right is Hamada. So there's Hamada, and beneath it is just a man. And then above it, way over there, there's Leach, kind of copying Leach's one. Then there's Leach and Tweed. Then there's a Mountie. Then there's Janet Leach. And then there's one that was sort of my self-portrait. And I made these in a month. I had to cobble together sculpture clay because the only thing on site was throwing clay. And the potters were absolutely mystified at what I was doing. I had a little separate room. So this one, The Winds of St. Ives, that's my little self-portrait. I was just so happy. This was just like a culmination of a dream, making equestrian stuff, right? With a good reason. And so they popped that one up on the Leech shop roof. And Hamada, he went on, Hamada Comes to the Leech, I think it's called. The potters selected him to go on their new gas kiln. And Leech and Tweed, one of the 1926 versions I showed you of Bernard Leech's was on a roof for 60 years. And a collector bought the house, and he took it off the roof. And he has since donated both those 1926 Leech pieces to the Leech pottery. And he bought my Leech and Tweed, and he's put that up on the roof instead. So I'm really tickled pink that I have finished St. Ives too. So I carried on with these ideas, again, melding, plant. In this case, you see I've got a tree, I've got a plant, I've got the sea, and I've got people and a horse. The one in the middle, which has also disappeared, I don't know where it went, has got a tree, a baby tree, and the leaves are coming out of its head. And the one on the far right was shown in Hungary at one of their international exhibits, and it's in their collection. So I kept going, and these are still melded pieces. So in 2014, 15, sometime 16, Terry and I traveled to Chicago. And of course, went to the wonderful, wonderful Chicago Institute. And I encountered the lady on the left. And I was just taken, absolutely taken with her. For one thing, it's a woman freely riding on a horse. And of course, she's a Tang. And the other thing about her was this connection between her and the horse. These Tang artists, they were just magic. They were so good at what they did. And the one on the right, I've never seen, but it's an aspiration. She's a polo lady. She's playing polo. Her stick is long gone. But what I think the artist did was I think he had the horse in the mold, and I think he simply bent the legs to make it look like it's flying. But it really works, It's a beautiful piece. So I continued to make my horse and riders, and I started adding passengers and adding more narrative. Like these are all about journeys or something. The one on the right is Over the Edge. It's a bit cheeky, it's sort of a comment on the current world. And that is inlaid clay in the horse's body. So it was called Up the Creek without a paddle. And so it's got passengers in the boat. The one in the center is called Traveling to Lotus Land Through Mountain and Cloud. And again, there's passengers. And the far right that's Leech. Leech did a lot. He painted the Baha'i Tree of Faith a lot on it. Those beautiful big platters with the tree in the middle, and it's that swirly. So that's the tree based on the Baha'i faith. So I popped that onto the horse, and there's a person on a journey with companions. So it's about, groups, people together, so on and so forth. And the last of these Whisper Sweet Nothings on the left, it's still in the YVR lounge. It's been there since before COVID. There's no room in the stables. I just hope they keep it, please. The one on the bottom is a porcelain piece, and it went to Latvia or Romania. It won an award, which is very nice, and it's porcelain, so it was quite dodgy whether or not it would survive. And of course, this one on the right is the one that was in the show. And again, you can see I tried to make a connection between rider and horse. Anyways, here's just showing you a process, and this isn't by any means all of the versions I did. So there's a horse and rider without any mane and tail. And what a difference, eh? I mean, to me, it's just a massive difference. And then I'm just trying, different things like fishing line, different colored wire. I put nails in the bottom of the finial or the roof tiles. So those are all ersatz roof tiles, right, that I've got the horse on. And then, I did curlicues, jaggedy ones, and finally came up with whatever I came up with. So now this is the third trajectory of the show and the talk. And I'm going to call Drew in to make comments when, and here, this is it. This is her without all her hair on. I took that picture just after you left. So I'll just briefly touch on this in that Drew sent me all these images over the phone. And Drew came armed with ideas. So the idea came to me literally in April. I was leaving for the month of May to a residency, and the show was going up June 6th. And about halfway through April, I thought, oh, geez, all those pieces are the same size. There's not enough work. And even though it was 2 years of work, not enough work. And I thought, Drew and I have been planning a collaboration for years. So I called up Drew and said, what do you think? Do you think? And I knew what I wanted to make. I wanted to make a big female figure with a big skirt, because then if you go really tall, it's really easy to have a pyramid shape, right? It's very easy to do. We only had 2 weekends. So I couldn't be fancy about its structure. And then I thought, I can do the structure and Drew can do the surface. I don't know if you understood that, but anyways. So you can perhaps talk a bit about these images.
Sure. So at that point, I'd gone to Debra's studio a couple of times and had a look around, and I saw that she had this massive collection of shards, different broken bits of things, and I said to her, I said, well, you're hanging on to all this. Well, she said, this is an example of things I've done in the past. It shows me what the certain glazes turn out like, details on certain things that I may want to reproduce, and I just keep them around as inspiration. So I started thinking about these porcelain rooms in great houses where they would have their dishes on built-in shelves to show the wealth of to their guests and so forth when they're having dinner parties and so forth. And I thought, wouldn't that be great to create these sort of architectural shelves on this skirt and display all these broken bits like treasure, sort of create the skirt as in a way as a museum. And then I was also inspired by Martin Engelbrecht. I think that's how you say the guy's last name. He was a printmaker, a German printmaker in the 18th century, and did these composite images of people dressed up with all the tools of their trade, right? Mm-hmm. And that was the other inspiration I thought of the big skirt, the character that Deb and I devised to show off her wares. Yeah, and then I came across this third piece. I'm sorry, I don't remember the name of the artist, but
isn't it something
marvelous?
Yeah.
Who had created these wire forms and filled them up with broken shards.
How smart is that?
Smart.
It's just. I just thought that was a really gobsmacking
marvelous. Yeah. It's based. I'm pretty sure it's based on Las Maninas from Velázquez, right? Yeah. The guy was a Spanish artist that did these pieces and was inspired by Velázquez.
Yes,
Velázquez, yeah.
Got it. So Drew sent me these through the internet, through the mail, through the phone, and Drew could do these drawings on his phone. And we were having all these discussions, about what we were going to do with the skirt and yada, yada, yada. And Drew was very, very caught up with the idea of corbels. So Drew made the corbel on the far right, that clay thing, and I made a mold for that so we could do repetitives, and off you go.
So initially I had the idea that these sort of corbels and in a sense referencing ruffles on a fancy skirt or something like this, but simultaneously also talking about architecture. And so that's kind of where that idea came from. And initially I had it that we were going to have these sort of little spheres on the bottom, which is typical of those corbels. And I said, oh, well, why don't we glaze them and have them look like pieces of fruit or something like that? And then we talked about it back and forth and thought, maybe not so much. And you'll see later on what we ended up doing with them. But and then and it was around that time that I had remembered this aunt of mine had this collection of these ridiculous little ladies dancing minuets and things. And they had these skirts that were made out of this like 3D kind of lace type stuff. And I looked it up, and it's called Dresden lace. It's where the people in the Dresden porcelain factories take lace and dip it in porcelain, and then you can sort of maneuver and manipulate it, and the fabric burns away, and then you're left with this lace. And we were pretty skeptical at first as to whether or not we could pull it off. So I came over armed with this massive piece of crochet, this old stained up tablecloth that someone had taken millions of years to make at one point or another. And then we started hacking it up and dipping it in the porcelain and testing it and seeing what would happen with it. And we gave it a few tries, and yeah. And then we ended up actually making it work. I mean, we didn't even have to work too hard.
It just worked.
It did
It
work.
just worked. And the thing was that
Beginner's luck.
test didn't come through till we had actually committed
Yeah,
to the lace
yeah,
and the clay.
yeah.
And I just thought, well, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. You know, maybe we'll get an outline of the lace. Maybe we'll get this and that. I had no idea the lace was so sturdy.
Yeah, and
You
it
know,
really did
it
what we
really
wanted
worked.
it to. Yeah.
The thing was, Drew's very adept, and he managed to, he figured it out that he really needed to layer up that lace with a lot of slip. Like you weren't skimpy about it.
No.
You really spent a lot. So that is the one and only test that we had to work with, and that is the one on the blue. And actually, we never went through with that blue, anyways.
No, we didn't.
No. So I had this stupid idea of making paper clay. I don't know why. I had a perfectly good sculpture clay. But anyways, I thought, oh no, we'll do paper clay. It'll make it
Well,
lighter.
I think you were concerned about the weight,
Yes.
right?
So I thought it would make a difference. I don't know. What do you think? No, I don't think it made any difference at all.
Well, and initially we were thinking about using paper doilies as well because we were concerned that the crochet
Yeah,
wouldn't work. So yeah,
that's right.
yeah,
And the doilies did melt. They did not
they
survive the
did
fire.
not survive.
Yeah, I did test some doilies.
Yeah, yeah.
So I set Drew, he's younger than me, so I set Drew to work on making that paper clay, and you spent half of a weekend rolling it
It
out.
was actually,
And then I did the quick, I quickly built the structure up. It doesn't take long. And by the end of the weekend, we had a 50 inches, I guess,
Yep.
about that.
yeah.
And then Drew works full time. And so during the week, I made the torso, the upper body, and the head, so that it would be ready for the last weekend before I left. And so I had that all ready for Drew when you came on the next Saturday.
Yeah.
And so that's just showing you Drew doing his thing. So carry on.
Yeah, so once we figured out what exactly we were going to do, and we'd made the mold and everything else like this, and then of course Deborah had to take off and go to her residency, so I would come over after that and start mounting all this stuff onto the surface to create this sort of architectural thing with the corbels and the slip-soaked lace and everything. That is a piece of the lace down there, not dunked yet, obviously, because it's still quite white, just to see shape-wise how it would work. And then after a while, I started looking at some Tudor architecture and windows and so on and so forth, and figuring out ways to cut the lace that was most aesthetically pleasing to create that repetitive pattern.
Yeah, so that was not quite the end of the weekend. So I was still here. I think I was still
Oh yeah, you
screwing-
were. That's
I
right.
think I
Yeah.
was still screwing around the face, trying to do
Yeah,
it.
that's right. That's right.
So Drew was,
Yeah.
you
That's what
did,
you were doing.
you did that lace in a day and a half. All the lace and the, Amy, did you have the word for the framing around that lace? Yes, thank you. There's the word. Can you remember that? Cartouche. Anyway, so so Drew also did all the cartouches. We did a discussion on how many corbels to use. And then, other than that, I had nothing really to do with it. Drew figured out the bosses, which are the buttons. And then you can see, he just kept applying more and more slip.
Well, and the other part of it was, after a while, I figured out we wanted something sort of that had a sense of dimensionality to it.
Right.
And I wasn't really entirely sure how that was going to work. So what I did was I started creating these sort of, I don't know what you would, like a support system basically to force the lace out, as you can see, so that you could actually see the effect of all the fibers in the
That was
lace.
such a good idea. Such a good
I
idea.
didn't know it would work, and it was just lucked out that it did.
I thought all those little arms would crack. So all these little arms here, look at this, I got this fancy thing. All these little guys here would crack, but they didn't. They didn't. And then so Drew popped something underneath. So Drew popped something underneath that middle thing
It was
to pop it off the surface.
It's a little
Right?
like baby finger-sized rod of clay, basically.
It was such a good idea. You know, made so much sense.
The
Yep.
slip is painted on, it's not lit.
No, you couldn't. You couldn't. No, Drew had put it in place. Then you added,
Yep.
and then you separated it from the body with the
That's
little
right.
arm.
Well,
Then you dumped it, didn't you?
Yeah, I dunked it first, applied it to the surface, and then once I had it the way that I wanted to, I applied more slip. Yeah, yeah. So that yeah, well, I wanted it to have, puck, right? Yeah.
So before we got all the way, I decided. Now, Drew had located a wonderful filmer, Viola Frey, who was a great Californian sculptor of figurative work, and she used to make very tall, very very direct, very unfancy work that was very brightly, broadly painted. And her pieces would be 10 feet tall or more. She had a real thing going, and her work often ended up in universities and places like that. And what she used to do, or get her assistants to do, was he would take one of those bandsaws and just right through the really hard,
We were
dry
blown away
clay.
to
Yeah,
see
you couldn't believe it. And we just couldn't, we couldn't wait because the clay was wet and we couldn't wait for it to be dry. So we couldn't do that. And we were scared to death anyways. But so I hand cut it with a knife and then I jammed in cardboard, just to keep it all separate. And then Drew just carried on and carried on. And that's at the end of the second weekend with Drew there on the right. So she's not 5 feet, sadly. I really wanted her to be 5 feet, but it helps. She's almost 5 feet. There we go. So while Drew went back to work, and I had about 4 days left. So they were wet. So I had to force dry them. I was putting them in and out of kilns. I had fans on them. I elevated them. I had the temperature in the studio turned up. It was just wild. And I managed to dry them out. And then I put them in the kiln wet because I had to. And I had to do 2 or 3 firings because only 2 would fit in at a time. And that's just the skirt. And I had just fired them very, 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 very slowly. They did warp a bit, and they weren't warped at all when we made them.
No.
So I think if I had done slow drying, they would never have warped. But,
No.
we had no choice.
No, for next time.
Pardon me?
How do they fit together?
Oh, a little wobbly. No, I just went straight. I just cut.
Stacked on top.
I just stacked. I just cut
And
straight
not
through.
glued together.
No, because I have to be able to dismantle it and put it somewhere. Like, what am I going to do with it? Thing weighs about 200 pounds.
But we designed it around that idea that
Yeah.
we would have to take it apart.
Take it apart.
Yeah.
Put it together, take it apart, put
Yeah.
it together. And right now, Terry, we had a whole bunch of white plasticine, and Terry really put the white plasticine on, just so if anybody knocked it at the show, it would come over. Anyway, so just to show you, here she is before. So after we had done all that, I also had to paint the blue slip on. And so Drew had done all the white slip, but I painted on the pink slip for her skin and the dark blue, royal blue slip for her dress. And then I also, on top of that, it was raw, right? I had to paint the glaze because it was only going to be one firing. I only had time for one firing. So I then painted the glaze directly on top of the raw slip and just, oh dear God, please let something work. And it did, it came out, it's a bit streaky and thing, but the whole thing is very raw, right? There's nothing sophisticated about how it was made. The thinking behind it was sophisticated, but not the actual manufacture. And then now you can see how wonderful the slip is. It's really alive. The lace, like it just popped right off. It was just so thrilling. Now we have to be so careful every time I picked it up not to touch the lace, right? Because it is frail. So when I left, yeah, 2 weekends is insane. So when I left, I did a silver luster fire. So the bosses, the buttons are silver luster, and there is the beginning of Drew transforming it.
Yeah, so now you're away, and then
Yeah, I'm gone.
okay,
You're free.
yeah.
You're free. There's no me hanging over your shoulder.
It was great. Anyway, so and so we started scouting around and finding stuff. So my friend Rosemary, Debra's sister, and her daughter and her granddaughter were all there, and we were going through all the plastic pots of shards and everything, and then we went out into the garden after a while because we ran out of small things that were interesting, and just everywhere in Deb's garden we were finding bits and pieces of broken projects and everything else like that to give the big skirt her museum, like we wanted all this stuff on the shelves and everything else like that. And it was so much fun trying to find things that, oh well, we've got a green piece here, we better put something orange over here, or whatever it happened to be, to fill the shelves up, to give it that full look.
Legally, are they attached?
Yeah, we did it with silicone.
Silicone glue.
Yeah,
it rules.
Yeah.
It lasts for years.
Initially we had the idea that we would actually
we were
assemble
gonna
everything.
fire.
We were
Yeah,
gonna
we had so
glaze
many
it
ideas.
on.
Yeah.
We were gonna glaze it on, and who knows what? I really hope that this is the first of many collaborations. Maybe next time we'll be able to.
Yeah, that was a very risky idea. Actually balancing these things, getting them into the kiln, and then balancing them on the shelves, and putting glaze under them, and just hoping that they would stay put. You know how things wander? When the glaze starts to get liquid, it just goes sideways and then jump off the shelves.
Well, and even with the silicone, actually, certain things.
Some driftage?
Well, there were certain things that are like standing there, like, reading something or listening to music or whatever, and I'm like, when this song's over, hopefully that stuff's hard enough that I can actually take my hand away and it'll stay where I put it.
Well, you got it there. So I came back, and it was 5 days to the show opening. And so Drew came over for one afternoon, and we put in all the hair on the left. And so Drew would sort of yard it out and cut it, and I'd sort of jam it in. It's really tedious. It's a very tedious process. And then it was incomplete. It just looked wild. And then it took me another 2 days to cut the rest, stick them in, wait for the silicone to harden, and then literally wrestle with this wire, because I just hadn't thought, all my little heads are this big, right? I hadn't thought my way through, 3 feet of wire and hundreds of pieces of it.
Initially, Deb had the idea that she's going to have this one
It was going to come over the front.
perfect
Yeah.
swirl,
Yeah.
one single
Yeah.
like that wire wasn't going to let you do it.
No, I could not pull the wire any further forward than I did. And I ended up I was all cut and scratched. I really wasn't sure whether I was going to make it, because I had to use all my strength just to bend it. And so there she is, just with her silver bosses. And there she is with Drew's shelving work. And now while I was doing the hair, Drew made a very nice platform and used a dark blue velvet, because we wanted to elevate her. We knew we had to do something, and she had to be able to move. And so there she is, complete, pretty well, and in situ.
But what about the white on the skirt? Because in that one you've got the piece that's attached, but there's no white. The middle one, it looks like it's been fired. And then you've attached the in the garden. But on the right hand side, her skirt is a different color. White.
I think it's the lighting. I think it's the camera. Yeah. It's basically we had long discussions about how much blue. Blue shells, blue corbels. Do we do a blue background? Do we do a white background? And we felt, and then there was the what were they, Amy? Thank you. See, my memory's gone. Cartouches were a pale blue, and not a very strong blue. But we just sort of thought if we had too much background, then you wouldn't see what I wasn't sure what Drew was going to do, but you weren't, whatever was going on those shells would be potentially lost against too much color and so forth.
And I wanted something repetitive.
Right.
To
Yeah.
show off the stuff.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So here we are at the end, pretty well. There she is in situ, and she really changed the dynamic of the show. And it was fun to take a risk. I must say, the only risks I take in my life, if I can possibly avoid any risk, but the risk I will take is I do love risking. I do love doing single fire. I do love doing risky things in ceramics, and that's.
And in the end, I'm glad the gigantic single swerve didn't work out, because this hair is way better anyway.
The horns.
The horns.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's definitely horns, isn't it?
Yeah.
I remember some mothers when I was about 11 years old, and we were watching our sons playing competitively, basketball or something like that. We're all standing around watching, and there's a little gaggle of girls on the sidelines, and the mothers started muttering about these girls looking at their boys. And I remember saying to them, "Watch it, ladies, you're growing horns." The mother-in-law thing. You're not a mother-in-law yet. Anyway, so those are like horns. And this was my last shot. So these are my muses. And a lot of what I did, how I felt about my work and done with my work has come from my family and the feelings I have in my family. A lot of the figurative work, the emotion attached to it, the anxiety attached to it, all those things are from our family. So there they are, the muses. And I think I'm going to go back to babies. Well, thank you. Oh, any further questions? Actually, we should do that. Yeah. So we've got lots of time. So if you guys have any questions, ask away.
Can I ask
Oh.
one thing?
Yep. Of course.
How do they stay on?
Oh, they're cemented.
Oh,
They're simply cemented. So what they do is I guess they probably cement. So I have to repeat you. So how are the horses kept on the roofs, especially when you think of high wind and so forth? Of course, the ridge tiles are cemented on, and cement, is a really old. Yeah, and then they take the feet and they just kind of cement the feet straight on, like the one that wins in St. Ives. You can see they've done at least a neat and tidy rendition of the cement. But that's how they do it, and then it doesn't freeze. You see, you won't find these. Nothing of these will survive for 100 years beyond the West Country, which is the warmest part of Britain. Yeah. So if you were, anything that was up in the north, and I'm sure they had them. I've seen stone ones. I've seen stone equestrians on churches. Oh, they are so nice. But I've only seen a few. Mind you, again, if you went around to all the churches in Europe, you're going to find it. I mean, it's St. George. And I found a statue of St. George in Romania.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And was that one ceramic as well?
No, it was bronze.
Oh,
but
nice.
It was in Romania, I didn't know St. George was so popular. Yes, he is ubiquitous. And don't you think the dragon was a dinosaur? Don't you think they found bones and imagined dragons?
That's cool.
Why not? Why not? Because where else would the dragon notion come from? I mean, they haven't seen big lizards or anything, but they may have seen a dinosaur skeletons somewhere. Who knows where?
It's a thought.
Anyway, it's just a thought. It's one of those random thoughts. Any other questions? Okay. Class is out. You're free to go. Oh, yeah. Yeah. That would be correct. Yeah. We weren't actually taught. We were there independently. And the thing is that once you do one slip cast, you make several, and then honestly, you become a mold slave. You start you just start making more and more. And then it's just natural. There was a lot of exhibits, 90s, early 2000s, where there'd be 1,000 little tiny jugs, in a gallery. It was very popular because it's so effective, you know. And so the idea simply became because I could.
But we did do a workshop.
Yeah. Yeah. Gabby Cozell, and she's one of the teachers at the International Ceramic Studio. I mean, she could make 53-piece molds. These guys could make molds. My God. Oh God, three piece would be pushing my technology. Oh, her molds were beautiful. But yeah, we did take a little private class with her for 1 week. Yeah, in Western Hungary. It was only 1 week because then we went to the residency after that for another 2 or 3 weeks. Yeah, yeah. Yes, Jules.
I'm just curious, is this like when you finish a book, in both your heads is the next chapter?
Yeah. We're sort of thinking like, what can we do next? And Drew thinks he wants a walk-in skirt. So there you go. Walk-in skirt. Oh God, yeah. I think we need a large Canada Council grant, and we need to go to Holland for that one. Yeah, because they have the technology. They do that particular. Mary remembers the name of that place.
It's in Denver talking about, but I can't remember.
Denner Toggenbosch is where it is. Yeah, in Amsterdam or near Amsterdam. But it's that residency specializes in challenging technical requirements, whereas a place like International Ceramic Studio, you get your room, and they have fabulous kilns and clays and everything's available to you, and terrific technicians and wood fire, lots and lots of wood fire. So you can do whatever you want there. You don't have to come with a pre-plan. Same as Shigaraki, you don't have to come with a pre-plan. Again, fabulous technicians, fabulous facilities. I've gotten grants for a number of these, so it doesn't actually cost me. It's tremendous if you can get the grant, And so I think most of them are pretty free agent, except for the one in Holland where you are expected to go with a plan and to know, and then you present it, and then they help you resolve the technical issues.
You better start writing.
Yeah. But it needs a home. You see, my yard is full. That's the trouble. You have to get rid of this stuff. Right now the big debate is, where does the big skirt go? So I'm sort of looking at places on my porch and so forth. So with all these things, you have to figure out where. I mean, Susie, your yard is full of your stuff like mine, right? I mean, our yards are wonderful that we have them. We're lucky to have them, and they're slowly melting into the earth. Yeah. So it's one of those things you just have to. You do have to concern yourself with where it's going to go, or you put it out in the back lane.
I was gonna say like.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Play bombing. Yeah. Yeah. That's right. They had to play. They did that. Well, you see, she's got silicone, and the water's going to run off of her because she's got nothing to hold the water, so she shouldn't. And I fired her pretty hot. I can't quite remember how hot I fired her. I do cone 3 or 4. I can't remember. Isn't that awful? But the higher I fired her, the better chance she has of surviving outside. I wouldn't leave the top part, the torso, out because the wire will just simply rust. I've got lots of rusting wire heads in my yard.
Should go from silver gray to a sort of a chestnut.
To a chestnut, that's right. Well, that'd be
It might
okay.
not be so bad.
Yeah. Why not?
High-speed film of her distant integration on.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I'd thrown shards into the beach near at a cottage which we had, and I'd thrown the shards just to see what the erosion factor would be over the years, and you could see they turned into lovely pebbles. Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
She will get, a lot of them do get a moss that buries itself in, if there's any porosity, the moss will work its way into the pores. It's a bit of a pain, but then they all become green. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there we go. Thank you so very much.